I could just put a montage of counterclaws going off, and honestly, that would probably be enough for me. But for those of you that are still not sold, I want to break down a weapon that is a defensive master, a walking tank if you will, that has a beautifully fun mechanic that comes with a new skill that furthers the fundamental core of what the lance benefits from the most: precision. Whether it's timing your guard to get a generous boost to your attack power, hitting the tail on a monster with every poke, or guard advancing right through a monster's attack, precision is the name of the game when you take up the lance. It's another one of those weapons that seems to lack in popularity, but is still a very fun weapon to play. Right off the bat, there are skills that Lance absolutely needs, and one in particular is an absolute must: offensive guard. Guard is a pretty important staple as well. I am a Guard 5 advocate for sure, but for a lot of the content in Iceborne, you can very much get away with using Guard 3. And right off the bat, you see how there's some versatility in how you can play the lance. I've told you guys before that I'm definitely not a speedrunner, so I don't really min-max or go for the meta all the time. I like comfy more than anything. I like being able to face tank anything and everything and take my shots with a higher level of security. You even have the option of having guard up in your build, or taking your chances with a well-timed power guard to take on attacks that are deemed unblockable. Lance isn't really a skill-heavy weapon. It brings out the best in weakness exploit as well, because it's just so easy to have a monster wounded all the time consistently with the clutch claw counter. Now, as far as how I build my lances, and let me be clear, I'm not considering myself an expert with the weapon, but this is what I work with. The build I use is a pretty typical damage build. The Teostra set bonus in the form of the Teostra head, gloves, and waist, and the Brute Tigrix chest, and Garuga legs to round it out. Of course, offensive guard being maxed out is pretty much a must for Lance, given that it's a constant 15% attack power increase. You then have your typical DPS boosting skills like critical eye, critical boost, and weakness exploit. I went with the couple part breaker combos, but only because they were the best available I had that included medicine, or recovery up. I like to keep recovery up maxed out because it gives me more room to play aggressively as I rely on my health augment to replace the chip damage. Guard 5 is going to be where people in the Lance community are probably going to be split. Some of the more experienced players tend to run Guard 3 and feel as if that's sufficient. I'm on the Guard 5 side because I love being able to face tank absolutely anything and still be in position right under the monster. Luckily, I can use that blast attack that's on Teostra's waist, since my Safi Lance is indeed a blast lance. You might notice that guard up isn't in the build because I'm trying to better train myself on using the power guard, since it gives you guard up after being in it for a bit. I can confirm it hasn't been going great as of yet, but I'll get there eventually. This build is a pretty safe and comfy version, so by all means, if you're newer to the lance, it should be able to get you out of a tough spot. You just might want to toss in guard up. Breaking down the mechanics that make me love the lance in Iceborne, you have to start with the fresh and new one that makes you feel so powerful: the counterclaw. Getting knocked up into the air, rodeoing back onto the monster, and having access to changing its direction, shooting it into a direction, or weakening the part is the literal definition of the word clutch. And that's just talking from a flavor standpoint. When you talk from a strategic or mechanic standpoint, it's incredibly useful and does not take very long to actually activate. It can get you out of a pretty big jam, and quite a few times I noticed that the secondary damage that comes from some monsters' attacks that have multiple hits was completely dodged while I was in the air going through the rodeo motions in the sky. They did an awesome job of balancing this too by still giving you that chip damage. That being said, with my recovery up at max, I still use the clutch claw a lot. Combine that with the health augment locked in and ready to recover that damage once I'm done ripping off that solid damage that the lance does with its grappled attack. It can't be underestimated just how well the counter claw keeps parts wounded. Between the dual blades, the sword and shield, and the lance, there really isn't an easier way to clutch on and wound a part. You get to take the chip damage and then in most cases, clutch onto the monster at the end of its attack after the actual hit would take place, leaving you to the number of options you have while you're grappled onto the monster. Did I mention just how awesome it feels to do this in the middle of a hard-fought hunt? Now we charge our way into the next reason I love Lance: the dash attack. It not only is a beautiful way to close the gap between you and a monster, but the damage you can do with the final thrust is nothing to scoff at. When you are one of the more experienced lance users, you can weave this into your poke 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 combo with absolute ease and do solid damage. This is another thing that I'm still working on. One of my favorite things to do with the dash attack is chase down a monster that's fleeing to get some of that extra damage before they get to their next destination. Even if you don't actually catch the monster in transit, the dash attack has stages that increase the longer you're running. Knowing this, you can still dash your way straight into a monster that is awaiting in a new area. Admittedly, this is on the lower end of the list as to why I love the lance, but it still has some great utility usage while doing solid bits of damage. Next, we have to talk about the clear draw to the lance, and that is the absolute indestructible force that is its shield. You aren't going to find a more powerful shield in Iceborne, and when you're talking to a guy who loves comfy like myself, having the lance shield on hand gives me great joy. Earlier I talked about having guard 3 or guard 5 being something that will vary between users, but when you do have guard 5, it's so powerful that you almost literally nullify the monster's attack completely. That in itself is just an awesomely gratifying and satisfying feeling. You then have the perfect opportunity to take those precision pokes of the lance straight to the monster's face or tail, depending on which of the monster's attacks you just reduced to nothing. I know there are people that do not enjoy the playstyle of face tanking, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I know that for myself and a lot of lance users, it is really gratifying. When you combine this with a guard up, and just a brief moment of silence for all of you veteran hunters that have still yet to pull a shield decoration. But as I was saying, pairing this with guard up is the absolute token for what is known in other games as a pure tank. One of my favorite examples of this power is when Teostra gets ready to do his supernova, and instead of running and diving like most have to, I hop in closer and closer right underneath. Once his move goes off and he's reduced to a shell of his former fire self, I'm in great position to rattle off strikes on any part that I want while he lands and roars. I know that grabbing Safi's attention while I used the lance was something that I enjoyed doing as well. Taking on a majority of Safi's attacks while my fellow hunters went in on it was a great feeling, mainly because most of Safi's attacks bounced off of me with minimal damage. Power guard is still something that should never be overlooked. If you are skilled enough to rock the lance without guard up and strictly rely on your power guard, you not only free up that restriction of having to find a way to put guard up into your build, but you also look hardcore, digging yourself in deeper to take on the brunt of an attack. From Ruiner to Safi, there's not much a lance's shield can't take head on. The precision of the lance pokes is something I've been alluding to throughout the video, but there is a specific reason where this precision really comes in handy and makes me love it even more. Cutting off tails. There's plenty of weapons that can slice off tails, but it just never seems to be any easier than when I do it with a lance. Especially when it comes to some of those monsters that have the thin, wiggly, wormy, fast-moving tails, or ones you specifically have to hit right at the barb, with Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian being a couple of examples. Having such a quick and fluid way of deciding either angle you want to poke gives you such an advantage in a hunt that will see you having to strike at opportune moments to lop off the part. And something that also goes well with focusing on a specific part is the fact that the lance isn't a cumbersome weapon to where you'll be knocking teammates out of position if you're both trying to weaken or cut off a certain part. The lance is a weapon that if you take it at face value, you assume that it's not a weapon that can do damage and is only good for defensive reasoning. While I do agree that they could still up the damage capabilities of the lance, I definitely disagree with the apparent notion that it is a waste offensively. They didn't change what the lance was known for, being an immovable, powerful tank. They took that identity and found ways to reward you for being that exact thing. The addition of offensive guard gives the lance a great boost to its offensive capabilities without it feeling hammy or forced in. But don't let the cries for more damage take you away from the reason that lance is awesome. You can take on anything and everything that Monster Hunter has to offer and stand there nearly unscathed once the dust cloud settles. Embrace that. You might not have the greatest amount of mobility, although for a shield using weapon it really does have impressive mobility. Guard dashing is also a viable way to reposition yourself when you need to. You rarely need to move, and you can control the tide of battle and bunker down in whatever area seems to be most beneficial to you. Run your guard 3 or guard 5 and raise your shield high in the face of danger. Once you're done taking that hit, drop your shield and unload your barrage of precision pokes into the monster. If the attack left the monster in a distant location, you can dash your way to it and drill it with that final thrust attack once you reach it. The precision you have while wielding a lance is going to benefit you greatly in hunts. The best of which is cutting off tails that are small and fast moving or ones that are hard to reach. Take all of these things into your hunt and show monsters just how much of a tank you are while their weak attacks buff your damage capabilities. But that's going to be it for this one, guys. The lance is a weapon lower on the list when it comes to popularity, but I think that's partially due to people seeing it as just a defensive option. The changes that have been implemented in Iceborne have benefited it greatly, from offensive guard to the counterclaw. I just want to remind everyone that we have a Discord community up and running finally, where every weapon user is welcome to join our group of hunting horn enthusiasts. If you like this video, please do let me know with a thumbs up. Comment below why you love using the lance or what has kept you from doing so. Subscribe if you haven't already for more Iceborne, hunting horn, and other Monster Hunter content. Dudes forever, have a good night, and happy hunting.